Would I still consider Quant to be a sleeping giant? Well, personally, in my perspective, I would say yes, even though nothing I say is financial advice. Let me explain why. Even though I'm going to discuss later on the idea of $2,000 when it comes to Quant, I first want to explain what I even mean by that term, right? Again, when I kind of consider Quant to be a sleeping giant. Well, first of all, I think the project to meet that criteria has to be giant, which I think Quant is. I mean, if I take a look at the market cap currently, it is around 1.3 billion. That's pretty massive. Quant is not the biggest project out there by any means, but that's a pretty massive market cap. Besides that point though, why do I think it's sleeping? Well, it's because I think that Quant, which could be said as well with a lot of other projects out there, it hasn't really had that next leg up. So then again, it's a pretty giant project, which I think is kind of sleeping in terms of the price chart. So then, yeah, I would actually consider it for me a sleeping giant. But besides that point though, when I take a look at Quant, maybe at the idea of 2000. Now, that is around an 18x from here, and the market cap at that point, considering current circulating supply, would be around 24 billion. I just don't see why that seems maybe too ridiculous in an event where maybe let's say there's even hypothetically an altcoin season, but this is just my perspective because I've seen Shiba Inu reach around 40 billion, right? And that was back in 2021. That year I saw Dogecoin reach over 80 billion in terms of market cap. And again, we're in 2025 right now, we're in October, we're nearing 2026. That was again back in 2021, years ago. So again, I just don't see this maybe as such a ridiculous market cap, especially considering kind of the strides that Quant has made, fundamentally speaking. But besides that, it's just not something that I would find, again, too ridiculous, but this is just my perspective. Now, people sometimes like to tell me, okay, around an 18x, why would you care about that? Well, I am totally aware that that is not going to become the best hypothetical upside out there of all time. And how can it? I mean, come on. There's many projects out there with way smaller market caps, and there's many, micro caps out there as well. Not to say that they're going to do hypothetically good, because for one micro cap that does, pretty good, there's a bunch that don't really do much. So then, I'm totally aware of that. But then, yeah, again, around an 18x is nothing like too groundbreaking at the grand scheme of things, but it's not too bad to me either, because when I take a look at, for instance, Dogecoin, right? Is that going to do an 18x in the next 5 months, let's say? I don't know about that. The market cap's pretty massive. Now let's tone things down a little bit and use something like, let's say, Bitcoin and Ethereum. If Bitcoin went to 300 grand, that's less than a 3x from here. If Ethereum went to 10 grand, that's also less than a 3x from here. So, yeah, again, just in the grand scheme of things, it's kind of like maybe around an 18x. I don't find that disappointing, even if Quant just went to like a grand, let's say, right? So let's say give or take around a 9x from here. Even at that point, I would much rather prefer that over not only Dogecoin, but Bitcoin and Ethereum personally for me right now. But yeah, even besides that as well, I just want to mention something real quick that I find kind of interesting. It doesn't really tell the whole story though, but I just want to mention this real quick. If I take a look at the maximum supply of Quant, now it's going to depend on where I see it, but then sometimes it's hovering around like 14.5 to around 14.8 million. If I take a look at the maximum supply of Bitcoin, it's 21 million, right? I mean, it's not that much in the grand scheme of things. It's kind of rare considering Bitcoin's popularity. But then Quant, literally again, even if we take a look at the most kind of highest example, which is around 14.8 million in terms of the maximum supply of Quant, even if we minus, right, we remove 5 million Bitcoin from the maximum supply for whatever reason in the make-believe scenario, that's still over 1 million more than Quant's maximum supply. Again, I just want to mention that real quick. It doesn't mean that Quant is going to be more popular than Bitcoin, because I don't think it will ever, by the way. But I just think it's pretty cool to mention nonetheless. But besides that, right, why do I like Quant fundamentally? It's because I like the Quant network, because the Quant network is made up of the Overledger network, which actually is made up of the Overledger OS users. But then again, the Quant network is made up of the Overledger network and the Overledger OS. But again, just because the Overledger network is made up of the Overledger OS users, I'm just going to kind of skip that and just go on and continue to talk about the Overledger OS because I think it's more interesting anyways. But besides that, when it comes to the Overledger OS, what it does is that it allows something called a multi-chain application to be built. Now, what is a multi-chain application, right? It's an application that is built on top of multiple blockchains instead of just one. So again, hence the name multi-chain application. Now, besides that, though, some people may be thinking, okay, why would this even be interesting? Why not just stick with one blockchain and that's it? Well, it's because for one blockchain, right? I've never seen just one blockchain become super perfect like that. I've never seen one that is perfect. So then to me, there needs to be a way to kind of, again, have multiple blockchains instead of just one in terms of building an application. Because imagine if I was a developer, let's say in a make-believe scenario, and I wanted to build an application on a specific blockchain. Maybe I might like its speed, maybe I might like its, scalability, but what happens if maybe I don't like the security? But what maybe happens if I don't like the gas fees? Then, if I'm only stuck with that blockchain, then that's kind of it, right? But then a multi-chain application, the kind of, I would say, interesting thing is this. I'm just going to use an example. Through the Overledger OS, an application can be built that, let's say, takes advantage of the speed of the Stellar blockchain, which is very popular, right? When I think about Stellar, I think about XLM, but besides that, at the same time, taking advantage of the security of the Bitcoin blockchain. Wouldn't that be pretty interesting? Now, I'm not telling them to do anything, but then that's just kind of the example that I use. Again, building an application, let's say, that takes advantage of the speed of the Stellar blockchain, and at the same time taking advantage of the security of the Bitcoin blockchain. That is how kind of interesting I find the Overledger OS is. So yeah, I just find that pretty interesting nonetheless. Now overall though, there's one thing I can do, and that is just stay patient, because, whenever Quant, or let alone this altcoin space, decides to have that next leg up, it's going to be beyond my control. The only thing I can do is stay patient, hold, and that's it. Now when it comes to Quant, it's had a pretty good recovery, but it's still kind of not that much in the grand scheme of things. Again, pretty good considering where it once was, but not too much in the grand scheme of things, and there's still a ways to go. So I'm still staying patient, I'm holding, and I'm waiting, and that's pretty much about it. Now, I'm not only just holding Quant, by the way, I'm holding other projects too, but sometimes when people like to tell me, oh, when it comes to Quant, it's not that exciting. Well, I mean, Quant's not a meme coin, right? No, don't get me wrong, I still hold meme coins too, but that's not the only thing I want to hold. I also want to hold other projects too that, have this kind of rock solid fundamentals the way I take a look at it. So yeah, that's why I'm still staying patient and why Quant is one of my foundational pieces when it comes to my portfolio. Now, one of my kind of early videos was actually when it comes to, making videos, right, was on Quant. So I've been holding Quant, keep in mind, ever since 2022. So it's been quite a while at this point, but you know what? I'm still holding, I'm still staying patient. Now, Quant has showed kind of moments of brilliance along the way, but then in the grand scheme of things, there's many projects out there that have kind of outperformed Quant ever since I started holding it. So you know what? It is what it is. I just don't want to give up like that, though. I'm just still staying patient and just holding, but I'm not telling you to do anything. So whenever the altcoin season, if it ever even wants to happen during this cycle, because I don't think we've seen one yet, by the way, but it's just my perspective, whether or not it happens in October, let's say it even waits until next year, for whatever reason, let's say in March of 2026. It's beyond my control, but I just want to be staying patient, holding, and that's pretty much about it. And feel free to subscribe if you enjoyed this video. I'd greatly appreciate it. It's Melanie the Captain, and I'll catch y'all on the next one. I'm out. Peace. Bye.